Hi. So these chapters in Chronicles give us yet another perspective on Hezekiah's story, giving some details that weren't there before. Like during the siege that Sennacherib set up to try to defeat Judah, Hezekiah consulted with his leaders and came up with a strategy to fortify the city and stop the supply of water through the land, um, as a strategy to send them away. But in all of this, he encouraged the people to be strong and courageous in the Lord, not trusting in their own strength, not trusting in the strength of the preparations that they had made, but in the Lord. I believe that this is why the people didn't flinch or didn't answer when Sennacherib's people came and were, speaking threats and trying to intimidate them, and they didn't say a word. It was probably because they had seen everything that they had done to prepare, but their king had told them, don't trust in the things that we did, but trust in the Lord. The battle wasn't a physical one, as the Assyrians thought, right? It was a spiritual battle, and Hezekiah seemed to understand that, and then he went to the Lord in prayer. That's an important lesson. I believe that most of the things that we go through, that we think that we're struggling with, I mean, even the Bible is clear that we don't struggle against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. So I think it's important to approach every battle, every situation, every conflict, everything that we go through, in the same way. Go to God in prayer, understanding that it's a spiritual battle first before it's a physical one. One major thing that stood out to me after the Lord saved Judah, their fame seemed to travel far, and all the nations that heard, saw them as the G's for being able to withstand the Assyrians. As a result, many brought gifts to Hezekiah, and he was exalted in the sight of the nations. That's 32 verse 23. So I'm inclined to believe that this was the source of the pride that led to Hezekiah's downfall, because not only was he seen as that G who, whose nation withstood the Assyrians, but people came, with gifts and gave him so much. I believe that maybe that's where he even got all the stuff that he was showing off to the Babylonians, the Babylonian envoys when they came in. And in 32-31, we see that God withdrew from him in order to test him, to know what was in his heart. Forgetting his source and focusing on his wealth was his Waterloo. We must know that from the story that we read, God withdrew from him. So what was in his heart, and what was in his heart came through, and that was pride. Manasseh's reign had a surprising twist in the book. I wasn't sure, to be honest, when I read, how to feel about it. Now, remember from yesterday's reading that he was an evil king and undid most of what his father Hezekiah had done. But from verse 10 to 17, we see that he repented. God spoke to him and the people, and they didn't listen, and he allowed the Assyrian armies to invade them, and they took Manasseh away in captivity. And in his affliction, he humbled himself and repented and prayed to God. And God heard him and brought him back to his kingdom. Then he knew that God was God. When he came back, he fortified the city, and he tore down the foreign altars and cast out all the idols, repaired the altar of the Lord, and made proper sacrifices. He essentially tried to revert to the status quo from his father's time. But the people still sacrificed on the high places to God instead of the temple, even though he had done what he needed to do. So even though Manasseh was such an evil king, we see that towards the end of his life, he did repent. We'll see more about that as we read along, but let me share my lesson about God from these chapters. Through all of Manasseh's evil deeds, God's desire was to bless him. I believe this was why he spoke to him, and even when he didn't listen, he now sends him off to captivity, knowing that in captivity he would be humble and he would pray, and then God would do what he wanted to do all along and bless him. How amazing is that? How many of the difficulties, I started to think, how many of the difficulties I've gone through was just God's plan to bless me? How many times have I taken the wrong turn, made the wrong decision, and God had just allowed me to go through that path only, for me to be humble and for him to bring me back? Although he started out evil, he ended up good. He was the opposite of Hezekiah, who started out good and ended up evil. The focal point in both stories was where both men decided to focus. Manasseh decided to focus on God and repent, and Hezekiah took his gaze away from God, and that was his downfall. There's great reward in keeping our hearts and our eyes on the Lord. That's my lesson for today, and I hope it's something that you have learned as well. Looking forward to seeing you here tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.